Here it goes. All righty. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting on the program. It's another one of our All Things Israel edition, All Things Historic Palestine. And we welcome back our returning champion, Canadian lawyer, environmentalist, eco-socialist, anti-imperialist activist, all-round social justice warrior, media critic, NGO critic, independent journalist, one time for the Real News Network, correspondent on Canadian topics and the climate crisis, now the host of his own brilliant journalism outlet, Reason to Resist. And he was the Green Party of Canada's leadership contestant, and he almost won, got second place consistently through the ranked choice voting system. He's one of my favorite human beings, a compassionate gentleman, Dimitri Lascaris. Welcome back to the program.
You're too kind, Youri. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And don't forget, folks, please share widely all of One Plus One's past contents and present contents, and please donate generously to my PayPal. And yes, and please support independent media and help One Plus One overcome the avalanche of far-right algorithms and whatnot. And let's get underway. So, again, Dimitri, welcome back to the program.
Good to be here, Youri.
Always an honor to have you. Now, Dimitri, I originally wanted to do an entire show about the history of Greece and cover Greece before World War II, during the Cold War periods, and current affairs. But I think, like many people, we simply cannot turn away from what's going on in Palestine. And even those of us who are emotionally exhausted, a lot of us are simply just unable to turn away from Palestine, and even have a very hard time containing the rage when we see the avalanche of injustice that's being inflicted on the Palestinians. So I wanted to, so this is our All Things Palestine editions. But my first question I wanted to ask you is, since you are based part-time in Greece, and you've been spending a lot of time in Greece, and I think the year before last, you were in Lebanon, Syria, and even spent time in Cyprus trying to bring much-needed aid to Gaza. And I remember you also covered on your YouTube channel a protest that was happening in Greece, where Palestine justice folks were protesting the right-wing government of New Democracy, who continued to give arms to Israel. So my first question I wanted to ask you is, can you give an overview of the history of Greek-Israeli relations? And has Greece always, now I know during the right-wing junta, they were very supportive of Israel, but since Greece became a liberal democracy, have both the major parties in Greece, whether it's PASOK of the center left, New Democracy of the center right, and even the once mighty Syriza, have they all been very supportive of Israel? And is that often at odds with the majority of Greeks who actually want, justice for the Palestinians, believe in various forms of BDS? I'm curious your response.
Well, the attitude of the Greek government to the Palestine cause has evolved over time. Prior to the installation of a former Nazi collaborator and a Greek U.S. Army colonel as the dictator of Greece by the CIA, and this has been acknowledged by the U.S. government. They installed a dictator in Greece in the 1960s. Who overthrew a moderately left-wing government that was, I think, hostile to U.S. military bases in Greece and to, the imperialistic policies of the U.S. government. Up until that point in time, during the post-World War II period, the government of Greece, particularly that left-wing government of PASOK, was very sympathetic to the Palestine cause, and its policies were very much aligned with, the Palestinian solidarity movement and the views of a majority of the Greeks. And then, as you mentioned, this right-wing, extreme right-wing dictatorship came to power. They were, very much aligned with Israel's apartheid regime. Then when that dictatorship was overthrown by popular resistance in the early 70s, the incoming government more or less reverted to a position that was consistent with the views of the majority of Greeks. And then, so, I'm thinking here particularly of Andreas Papandreou, who was the Prime Minister of Greece in the 70s. During that time, Israel basically ran roughshod over the sovereignty of Greece. They assassinated, for example, a leader of the Palestinian resistance, Khalid Nazal, in the streets of Athens. They just shot him dead, not only
Wow.
committing a war crime in the process, but violating the sovereignty of Greeks, which elicited a harsh reaction from the Greek government. Um, but since then, since the 70s, gradually, Greece's governments, successive governments have shifted rightward in terms of their foreign policy. And today we are seeing, I think, under Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the New Democracy leader, they call their party New Democracy, but they're really a right-wing neoliberal government. They are
Exactly.
enthralled. They are totally enthralled to the United States and to Israel. They've entered into, various agreements with the state of Israel for the development of oil and gas deposits in the Eastern Mediterranean. Right here where I am, literally, I can see from where I'm sitting right now, an airbase of the Greek military outside of Kalamata, where there is a contingent of people from the U.S. drone manufacturer, I'm sorry, the Israeli drone manufacturer, Elbit Systems, and
Wow.
they are training Greeks in how to use their drones. And in fact, every single day during the week, we can hear aircraft flying overhead. They're doing training runs. I've seen drones in the sky above my house here. I've seen warplanes that look to me very much like Israeli warplanes look practicing potential strikes on Iran because Greece has a topography which is conducive to similar to the topography that the Israeli Air Force would have to deal with if it were to attack Iran. And I mean, in every conceivable way, this government is in league with Israel's genocidal regime. Polls show that the majority of Greeks to this very day do not want their government to adopt a pro-Israel policy. Despite all of the propaganda that we hear in this country about Israel and about its bogus justifications for wreaking havoc on the civilian population of Palestine. But it's just really, Yuri, a statement on how much the government of Greece, it's not just with respect to the policies, its pro-Israel policies, but when you look at its economic policies, its policies towards the Ukraine war, most Greeks do not want Greece to be sending weapons to be used as a transit point for the delivery of massive amounts of weapons to Ukraine. They don't approve of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but they don't want Greece arming the Ukrainian regime. And Greece is basically, the Greek government has flouted the will of the people and has continued to supply arms, not just allowing Greek territory to be used as a transit point for the delivery of huge amounts of weapons, but we've actually taken armaments out of our own stocks here in Greece and provided them to Ukraine. So our policies towards Israel, I shouldn't say our, but the government's policies towards Israel are part of a larger phenomenon in Greece, which basically amounts to a complete capitulation to the demands of the U.S. empire.
Unbelievable. And is that the same for the country of is that also the same for the island nation of Cyprus, uh, where where the Greek Cypriot side of Cyprus, you have many people who actually would like to see various forms of BDS on Israel, but the Greek Cypriot government continues to support Israel, continues to even allow British and American bases and NATO to use Cyprus as an offshoot to continue not just massive injustice being
Yeah.
inflicted on the Palestinians.
Absolutely. The Cypriot government Christodoulou is absolutely committed to support for Israel. Again, based on polling I've seen, a majority of Cypriots, Greek Cypriots, and certainly a
Turkish
large
Cypriots as
majority of
well.
the Turkish Cypriots are adamantly opposed to the Cypriot government support for Israel. There are two military bases, British military bases on the southern coast of Cyprus, which are actually uh, under international law considered to be territory of Britain. They're not. These are not leased bases. In the
Believe.
1960s, when the British nominally handed independence to the island of Cyprus, they conditioned this on the cession of Cypriot territory to Britain. And the main military base, which is being used and has been used throughout this genocide in Cyprus to arm Israel, and also as a base for U.S. and British attacks on Yemen. Also, it has been used as a base for British spy flights over Gaza, repeated spy flights over Gaza using sophisticated surveillance technology. It's called Akrotiri, just beside Limassol. I've been there 3 times during the past 15 months.
Okay, we're back on 1+1. So sorry about that. So Dimitri, so before we got cut off, you were explaining how the UK military uses Cyprus's territorial integrity to violate and do imperialism. Continue with what you were
Yes.
saying.
So there's a large British air base known as Akrotiri on the southern coast of Cyprus. And from that uh, air base, as has been documented by declassified UK, and I also observed this on multiple visits during the last 15 months to the edge of the Akrotiri military base, they've been sending huge amounts of weaponry to Israel. They've been using that base to launch attacks, the Americans and the British, on Yemen. And they've also been using that base to conduct spy flights. The British have been using their most sophisticated surveillance aircraft to conduct spy flights over Gaza, the site of this genocide, throughout the 15 months that we witnessed this horror show. And the British government, despite the extraordinary reporting of declassified UK, refuses to give any meaningful detail about what is in those cargo planes and what those spy planes are doing.
Unbelievable. And and overall, for many of our left-leaning friends across Europe who think that the EU is this infallible institution, I know you've, with Reason to Resist, you've been you do some very good critical reporting of the European Union. So, what has generally, historically, the EU's relation with Israel and Palestine been? Has it been one of fairness to both sides, or one of huge slavish support for Israel? And I'm curious, what's been the response of the EU, particularly since the October 7th uprising attacks that the Palestinian resistance did towards Israel?
Well, their sympathy for the Palestinian cause has been purely rhetorical. The governments of Europe and the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, Josep Borrell, they pay lip service to the cause of human rights and international law, but they continue to supply weapons to Israel. The main supplier in the EU has been Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and Germany cynically uses its culpability in the Holocaust to justify effectively helping to perpetrate another Holocaust. I don't think that has anything to do with the guilt or sense of responsibility of the German political elite. That may be a feeling that's shared amongst the population. I think it's a much more cynical calculus on the part of the German political elite. They, like all the major Western European powers, are concerned about their having access to relatively inexpensive oil and gas from West Asia. And they're supporting this genocide because they they actually want Israel to crush any and all resistance to Western hegemony in this region. And this has become particularly uh, important for them because they have cut themselves off from, or at least restricted their access, their own access to Russian oil and gas. So their ability to access relatively cheap oil and gas reliably from West Asia has become all the more important. My own view is that that's why ultimately, despite their rhetoric, they have been completely supportive of Israel. They want Israel to destroy by any and all barbarism necessary resistance to Western hegemony in the region. They want that. And I don't think we should have any illusions about that.
Unbelievable. And do you think the same can be said for France? And the image of France is that they are an honest broker between Israel and between Israel and the Palestinians. But certainly since Nicolas Sarkozy and the fake pretend socialist leadership of Francois Hollande, it's been very clear that Israel can do no wrong. And those who speak out for the Palestinians in France, especially in university campuses, are met with huge suppression and a smear campaign. So talk to us, because I know you've spent time in France, and your wife is of French, is a French background. So tell us what has really been France's historical role in the suffering of Palestinians.
Well, again, it's the French elite is imperialistic in its orientation.
Yeah.
All throughout the non-Western world, whether we're talking about Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Algeria, West Asia, also their policies with respect to left-leaning governments in South America, like Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia. Well, Ecuador is no longer a left-leaning government, but it was under Rafael Correa. They are hostile, absolutely hostile to any effort on the part of resource-rich countries in the non-Western world to exercise real sovereignty. They have a population, again, the population of France is largely, particularly, the population of North Africans, Sub-Saharan Africans in France. They're very much opposed to the imperialistic policies of the French government, as are a significant proportion of the French population. But this is all lip service. They pay lip service. At the end of the day, look at their actual policies. You mentioned the suppression of pro-Palestinian activism in France. It's been brutal, profoundly anti-democratic. France has refused to impose any kind of sanctions upon Israel. France, too, has participated in supporting Israel's genocidal regime militarily, economically, and politically throughout the past 15 months. So throughout Europe, whether you're looking at France, Germany, Britain, Greece, and other countries, you're dealing with a vast divide between public opinion and the agenda of the elites. The agenda of the elites are hegemonic, but most people on the continent, and I believe most people in Britain, are fundamentally opposed to these pro-genocide policies of their governments.
It's unbelievable, and I'm curious. I'm curious if, and then before I get to this big question, I have to ask you. I have to ask this question, which is: have you gotten the chance to see the Alex Gibney produced documentary, The BB Files, by any chance?
I'm aware of them, but I haven't had a chance to watch them.
Okay, so I'm not going to ask. Okay. Well, watch the documentary, and I'm very curious, and I'm very curious your response to it, and then we'll have to have you back on the program to talk about it. But anyway, it's a very good documentary about Netanyahu's corruption investigation, both the petty stuff and the big larger stuff. It also deals with his response to the October 7th. But let me ask this this big question. So right now there's a ceasefire that's going on, and the Palestinian resistance has been releasing hostages and so forth. But several journalists who have covered Israel for decades, and many within Israel who are journalists or who are certainly former deep state agents and whatnot, they claim that Netanyahu was asleep at the wheel when Hamas and other Palestinian resistance forces launched the attack on October the 7th at the Nova Music Festival. one of the demands of the popular anti-Netanyahu far-right coalition government is for Netanyahu to resign for what they claim have been criminal negligence for allowing the attacks to happen and using it to distract people in the public at large from his corruption scandals and whatnot. But I often wonder, had the Palestinian resistance not launched their attack and done the huge kidnapping, hostaging, they take, would there have been space for the small Israeli left and people of conscience in Israel to have advocated for a democratic, secular, one-state solution? Do you think there would have been space for that, or as noble as some of those protests against Netanyahu have been, when it comes to Palestinians, that's where the progressivism ends. So I'm curious your response on that, given the huge slaughter Israel has unleashed on Gaza. And I personally don't think that anyone has really won in this, but I'm very curious your response on I'm very curious your response.
Well, I think polls have shown consistently that the vast majority of the Israeli Jewish population supports the brutalization of the Palestinian people, and that they are opposed to the creation of a Palestinian state. They're definitely opposed to equal rights for Palestinians within a single state. The polling data is overwhelming in that regard. The the segment of Israeli Jewish society that supports Palestinian human rights is now razor thin, constitutes a very small proportion of the Israeli Jewish population. Why is that the case? I think it's due to an extraordinary degree of indoctrination.
Yeah.
Israelis are taught from a very young age that Palestinians are evil, that they're bloodthirsty savages, and they desire nothing more than the destruction of the Jewish people. That their occasional acts of violence against Israeli forces are driven by nothing more than anti-Semitism. And when this is all you've heard your entire life from a very young age, it's not surprising that you sign on to the kind of brutal, barbaric policies that the Israeli government has pursued against the Palestinian people. Um, this problem is going to be very difficult to fix. My own feeling after having, I never would have imagined, Yuri, that after 15 months of this horror show, that a majority of the Israeli Jewish population would have continued to support the policies of the Israeli government towards the Palestinian people. This is astonishing to me. I don't know that this kind of indoctrination can be overcome in the near term.
Yeah.
It can be in the long term, but it's a very, very long-term process. And I don't think it's fair to ask of our comrades in Palestine, the Palestinian people, to wait any longer. They shouldn't have to wait. So my view is that, if you're an Israeli Jew living in Israel today, and you're unwilling to live with Palestinians as equal citizens or to give them their own state, a viable state, well, you should leave. You should exercise your preferences by returning to the Palestinian people the land to which they and many generations of Palestinians have committed themselves, on which they have lived for centuries, and go to another country where you feel comfortable if you don't feel comfortable in that environment. I think that that's a sad outcome. I would love to see all the peoples living today in historic Palestine to be part of a single state, a democracy in which everybody is truly treated as equals. But I don't really see any appetite for that on the part of the majority of the Israeli Jewish population. So what is the alternative? The alternative is they should emigrate to countries where they feel, more at home.
So do you,
Because
so
this is
so do you think well, I'm going to try to combine these two questions in one, because I more or less have asked this before. So do you think that even though even though there's been these popular protests against Netanyahu and his far right government and their efforts to weaken the Supreme Court and the high courts, so that it's clearly it's obvious that Netanyahu is trying to do this so that he can wipe his criminal record and stop these corruption investigations. So even though there's been these popular protests against that and against efforts of scaling back the rights of women, the queer community in Israel, so even though so even with that in mind, again, it goes back to the whole progressive on everything except Palestine, or as I like to think of it, regressive on everything, especially Palestine. That that's where those popular protests ended. That the moment you start to talk about Palestinians, that the moment you start to talk about Palestinians as equal human beings, that there was no room for those popular for those popular protests. Ergo, it goes back to what many few Israeli dissidents say, which is change is never going to come from within Israel. It has to come from the international community. Okay, so Dimitri, so do you think, long story short, even though there was, even though there was a lot of noble progressivism in those popular protests against the Netanyahu government, it all ends when you talk about the rights of Palestinians. So ergo, it kind of goes back to what Israeli dissident voices, like your comrade Alon that you interviewed on your program, voices like Miko Peled, voices like Ilan Pape, and so forth, where they say that there is no changing Israel from within. It really is up to the international community and people of conscience to engage in BDS until Israel relents and sees the Palestinians as, human beings and ends its settler colonialism on steroids.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Youri, all the people you mentioned, Miko Peled, Ilan Pape, Alon Mizrahi, have all left Israel. They're all anti-Zionists, passionately committed to the Palestinian cause, and they've all left Israel. What does that tell you? That tells you that they themselves, and I think that they would openly acknowledge this. Certainly Alon Mizrahi did when I interviewed him recently. He does not believe that Israel can reform itself. He's even skeptical that a solution can be imposed by the international community because the Israeli population, by and large, has been so radicalized in its hatred of the Palestinian people. There is still, to this very day, a very small proportion of the Israeli Jewish population that is fighting courageously for the human rights of the Palestinian people, but they have no power and they have no prospect because there's so few of them now. They have no prospect of, changing, I think, Israeli government policy towards the Palestinian people. At the end of the day, I don't think that there is a reasonable prospect of persuading those people who are in the streets, and there are many people, of course, in Israel who protested against the Netanyahu regime, to demand justice for the Palestinian people. What they're concerned about, all the evidence indicates that the vast majority of those protesters, what they're concerned about is preserving democracy for the Israeli Jewish citizenry. That's what they're concerned about. They have no concern for democracy for the Palestinian population, the vast majority of them. As I say, there are some exceptions, but that is the sorry state of Israel's society today. It's a sick society, deranged society. I'm not the only one who's saying this. People like Norman Finkelstein are saying it. Miko Peled is saying it. Alon Mizrahi, when I interviewed him, he said it. It's a very sick society. And I don't think it's fair for us to say to the Palestinian people, you need to wait another, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, however long it's going to take to cure this sickness. They've waited long enough. They deserve their own state.
So in that case, it really doesn't matter if the Palestinians had not attacked at this moment of historical unrest in Israel. Israel will always suppress them brutally, and any resistance, no matter how non-violent or violent it is, Israel will always maintain a system of unspeakable acts of state terrorism and collective punishment, because the Palestinians have been suffering from a 10-year plus monstrous economic blockade, which the EU has supported, France has supported, the Greek government, even under Syriza, has supported. The leadership in the West Bank acts as a colonial viceroy to Israel. And even with the leadership of Hamas, it's important to note that Hamas, its official policy, actually advocates for a two-state solution, a 10-year ceasefire so that intense negotiations for such a state can be done. But Israel, with its Western and Gulf backing of its economic blockade and the many assaults on the Palestinian people, and again, while there have been these major protests in Israel for a good cause, Palestinians simply aren't featured into that. And with that, the Palestinians are always between a rock and a hard place. And but that's where that desperation act of October the 7th came from, correct?
Yeah, look, the proof is, I think, the ultimate proof that there is no means by which the Palestinian people can peacefully persuade Israel to treat them as equal human beings is the Great March of Return in Gaza. You know, back in 2018, 2019, when thousands and thousands of Palestinians, most of them refugees, peacefully approached, the separation wall, that cordons off this concentration camp from their homeland. What happened? What did the Israeli forces do? Even though these people were unarmed, many of them were children, women, there were disabled persons, medics, journalists. They gunned them down mercilessly, as a UN Commission of Inquiry found. So the Palestinian people, and that's, the Great March of Return is just one example. There have been many, many examples of peaceful opposition to the occupation in other parts of historic Palestine, including the West Bank, where people were brutalized simply for protesting peacefully. And, in many cases, they were subjected to administrative detention in Israeli dungeons. There were no charges brought against them because there was nothing to charge them with, but they were held for indefinite periods of time as hostages, simply because they expressed peacefully their opposition to the occupation. There is no peaceful means by which the Palestinian people can achieve justice on their own. They've tried that. They've tried it again and again, and they've been brutalized again and again with the complicity and support of Western governments. So I think that the evidence is absolutely clear that even if October 7th had never happened, the Israeli regime would have looked for and found an opportunity to carry out a genocide, because their project of, trying to force Palestinians to leave voluntarily, quote unquote, by making their lives so miserable had failed. So they got to a point where they realized, we're just going to have to wipe them out, or else, create conditions that are simply unlivable, as they have done in Gaza. They would have found a pretext to do that inevitably. October 7th, whether they allowed October 7th to happen, Netanyahu, that's possible. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that was the case. But even if that's not true, even if they actually were taken by surprise, which I think is a dubious proposition, I believe inevitably they would have found they would have looked for another opportunity to carry out this genocide with the full support of the West.
In
So
fact,
the time has come for us to face the facts, and the fact is that the Israeli regime has absolutely no interest in treating the Palestinian people as human beings. Zero. And it's our responsibility to bring an end to this, because we in the West brought this upon the Palestinian people. Israel could never have done this without our support, ever.
In fact, and I wanted to read this, for people who are very, hung up about, about Palestinian armed resistance and the use of hostages and so forth. This is actually from the Times of Israel itself, and in the documentary, the BB Files, produced by Alex Gibney, they also showed that the Israeli far-right government actually isn't even interested in releasing the hostages. So apparently, this was published in the Times of Israel, January 22nd, 2024, and this is a hostage member's family talking about meeting with Netanyahu and the far-right government. What was the atmosphere like? We left the meeting very disappointed because Netanyahu talked about dismantling Hamas as the goal of the war. He didn't promise anything regarding the demand of the return of hostages. He merely said a military operation in Gaza was needed to serve as leverage for the hostages release. We later found out that Hamas had offered on October the 9th and 10th to release all civilian hostages in exchange for the IDF not entering the Gaza Strip, but the government rejected the offer. Your response?
Yeah, they don't give a damn about their hostages. And by the way, many of them are not hostages. They're military personnel. They're prisoners of war. Um, but they've already killed. I mean, well, it's not ancient history to recall that in the early days of this genocide, there was a point at which 3 Israeli soldiers who had been taken as prisoners of war managed to break free from their captors, and they took off their shirts and they were waving white flags. They didn't want any Israeli soldier to think that they were carrying some kind of, bomb on them. So they took off their shirts, they're waving white flags, and what did the Israeli military do? They shot them dead. All 3 of them. I'm not making this up. This was admitted by the Israeli military. They called it a tragic accident. But what it really showed is that these people, the people who are running the Israeli military and the soldiers on the ground in Gaza, their one, an overarching mission is to kill, 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 kill. Anybody who might be a Palestinian civilian, kill them, shoot them dead. That's what that incident conveyed. The Israelis have killed more of the prisoners of war and hostages than they have liberated by a wide margin. They clearly have demonstrated that they do not care about the lives of these people. What they care about is ethnically cleansing historic Palestine of all Palestinians, and they're willing to sacrifice their own citizens in order to accomplish that goal. This is a truly heinous regime, Youri. We are talking about a level of monstrosity that we have not witnessed in our lifetime. Certainly, I have not witnessed in my own lifetime.
And not only that, but it's very clear when watching the documentary, the BB Files, and even from this moment of truth, because that's what the corporate media does, especially corporate state media in Israel. Every now and then, they'll always release a little bit of truth, because they have to maintain their credibility somehow. But that was just shocking reading that Israel just really was not even interested in releasing the hostages, all so that they can continue this monstrosity. And I have to ask you, as a journalist yourself, and but also one that's a media critic, what has been the worst of when we talk about the Canadian media and their complicity in Palestinian suffering? Which media outlet do you think has been the worst when it comes to covering Palestine and just normalizing the unthinkable when it comes to the suffering of Palestinians and the genocide that we've been witnessing?
Post Media, with hands down. Yeah, they've all been horrible, but Post Media is the largest newspaper publisher in Canada. Its flagship newspaper is the National Post. It is controlled by a pro-Trump hedge fund based in the United States called Chatham Asset Management. They have faithfully repeated every lie about the Palestinian people, every lie about this genocide. They have not uttered a peep of criticism of Israel's conduct throughout this war. I mean, literally, they are a propaganda arm of the Israeli government. There is really no corporate media organization that has done even a decent job of reporting this genocide. But there's no question that Post Media, the largest newspaper publisher in Canada, is hands down the worst, in my opinion.
Eve Angler on the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, when I asked him, which media outlet has been the worst, and he said without a doubt, the National Post and Post Media, and he says that that if there was to be an international trial on Israel's epic crimes against humanity, Post Media should definitely be in the dock with Israel.
Absolutely.
And actually,
the editorial staff, the owners of Post Media, they should be tried for incitement of genocide.
And
100%.
actually, and actually, can you talk a bit more about that when it comes to international when it comes to violating international law and investigations for genocide and other crimes against humanity? Has there been a precedent of media outlets also being charged for their complicity in crimes against humanity? And what in a just world, in a wonderful hypothetical world, what would that look like actually?
Well, sure. I mean, if you know, under the Genocide Convention and the Rome Statute, people who incite, crimes against humanity, whether they're media figures or governmental propagandists, whatever they may be, can incur individual liability. There's no doubt about it. That happened in the Second World War. Nazi propagandists were held to account in the most severe way for helping to incite genocide against the Jewish people. And that's the way it should be.
All right, sorry, folks. We've been having internet problems. We're back with Dimitri Lascaris. So, Dimitri, before our internet got cut off, I was asking you. You were. Well, yeah, I was asking you which Canadian, corporate outlet or state outlet has been the worst in covering Israel Palestine. You mentioned the National Post and Post Media in general, and then I asked you if in a just world, if we could get Israel, in the Hague for all of its crimes against humanity they've been inflicting on the Palestinians, is there precedent for actually news outlets to also be in the dock? And and I believe both
Yeah.
you and Eve Angler have said that the National Post and Post Media should definitely be in there. So do explain, in a just world, international, with international law, how an outlet like the National Post actually could be charged with crimes against humanity and so forth when it comes to the suffering of Palestinians.
Well, the Genocide Convention declares it to be a crime against humanity to aid and abet a genocide. So, if you are disseminating, uh, you know, uh, lies that are used to justify the destruction or attempted destruction of a people in violation of the Genocide Convention, you can be held liable for aiding and abetting genocide. And there's no exemption for people who call themselves journalists. This is a provision of the Genocide Convention that applies to everybody, not simply to non-journalists. So, in the case, my opinion is that the National Post has been, uh, in effect, and not just National Post, but other parts of the post media empire in Canada have been aiding and abetting genocide by spreading lies, outright demonstrable, flagrant lies disseminated by the perpetrator of this genocide in order to justify its heinous crimes. So I believe that there would be a solid basis to prosecute some of the people at the National Post for aiding and abetting genocide. Now, a few other things I want to say about the National Post, just to understand what kind of an organization we're dealing with here.
Please do.
Um, in 2000, this is on a separate issue, but it'll just tell you like how compromised this media organization is. In 2023, I went to Russia for the first time in my life for a month to explore ways to generate dialogue with the Russian people with a view to bringing an end to the Ukraine war. First and foremost, because it had the potential to spiral into a nuclear conflagration, but also because a lot of people were dying unnecessarily, avoidably. And, our governments here in the West have provoked this war. I think there's ample evidence of that. They helped to orchestrate a coup in Ukraine in 2014 that provoked a civil war within Ukraine, and then it expanded eventually to include Russia. We violated our promise to, Soviet and Russian leaders not to expand NATO eastward. And we'd go on and on, all the ways in which it was provoked. In any event, I go to Russia. While I'm there, I am contacted by a columnist for the National Post by the name of Adam Zivo.
Yeah.
Now, uh, I had been attacked previously by the National Post. They'd come after me because of my advocacy for Palestinians. And I therefore was very suspicious. And so I said to Zivo, I'll do the interview on one condition, and the condition is that I will record the entire interview and publish the recording. So that I don't want you misrepresenting what I say or leaving out important things that are vital context to my commentary. So he agreed to this. So I do the interview, and I publish the recording immediately, the whole thing unedited. And then 3 days later, on a Monday morning, the National Post publishes a front page hit piece on me, in which it accuses me of being a Kremlin shill and a spokesperson for Russian propaganda and all the rest of this garbage.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that wasn't surprising to me. Then we fast forward to, I think it was like the middle of last year. I can't remember exactly when. Adam Zivo reveals voluntarily that he was working at the time that he interviewed me for the Ukrainian and Canadian spy agencies. Okay. And when he's questioned about this by people who are experts in journalistic ethics, he's like, oh, there's no problem. Why would there be a problem? I was just trying to, advance the security interests of my country and help the Ukrainian people and all the rest of it. So this clown, he was accusing me falsely of being an agent of a foreign government, when in fact he was an agent of a foreign government, namely the Ukrainian government.
Unbelievable.
And the National Post did not deny any of this. It didn't deny that Zivo was working for Canadian and Ukrainian intelligence, and didn't punish him as far as we can tell. He continues to write for the National Post. There's been no consequences whatsoever for Zivo. So that'll tell you this is a media organization that has absolutely zero journalistic integrity. Zero. It is nothing but a mouthpiece for Zionism, for Western hegemony, for the military-industrial complex. And as far as I'm concerned, the thing should be banished from the public discourse. But certainly there are people there, in my opinion, who should be held accountable for aiding and abetting genocide.
Exactly. And also, if the National Post was to, was to declare for whatever reason bankruptcy tomorrow, would it be the worst thing that would happen to the Canadian public or the international public? Since
Well, here's the thing. It has.
Since the more you read, the less you know.
Yeah, but Post Media has done this. It's repeatedly gone to the bankruptcy courts to seek relief because it's a money-losing, black hole for money, and it really raises the question: well, why would Chatham Asset Management invest this much money in a black hole for money? And the reason is it's not that it didn't, in my opinion, it didn't acquire control of Post Media because it wanted to make money. It's because it uses it as a propaganda organ. So they don't mind, they don't prefer not to lose money, but they don't mind losing money because the fundamental function of Post Media is not to make money. They make money in other ways. It's there to manipulate public opinion.
Unbelievable. Actually, I'm going to squeeze one last question out of you before I let you go, which is which is the following. I would love to have you back on to discuss more about how we achieve Palestine justice and advance the democratic secular one-state solution. But let's leave that for another time. I wanted your thoughts on what happened with the last U.S. presidential election. Of course, sadly, Donald Trump, the Republican Party, achieved a huge victory. There were alternative candidates. There was the Party for Socialism and Liberation and the Green Party USA. And I was now the Green Party of the United States, led once again by Dr. Jill Stein, was trying to break the two-party system. And I was absolutely disgusted and flabbergasted that there was an open letter by the European Greens demanding that Dr. Jill Stein not try to stop the two-party system of the U.S., even though the Green Party of Germany, Green Party of Belgium, Green Party of of the Netherlands, all of these green parties across the world try to attack their two-party system, their three-party system, and they rightly will attack the supposedly center-left governments from the left and attack them for their inadequate climate policies. But to see so many of these green parties, mostly from Europe, from France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Spain, demanding that Dr. Jill Stein not try to stop the two climate criminals of the Democrats and Republicans, and even Elizabeth May of the Green of the Green Party of Canada didn't sign on to this letter, but did amplify it and did explicitly endorse it. I'm curious your response on that, and is this the end of Green parties as as alternative left parties as we know? If they, yeah, I'm curious your response.
Yeah, so this it's hard for me to even talk about this without spewing expletives and obscenities because I'm so disgusted by where does one even begin, Yuri, to
Yeah,
condemn this? So first of all, as you mentioned, they have proportional representation systems in Europe that allow people like Jill Stein, to have a fighting chance to gain political office rather than this, first past the post system that we have in Canada and the United States, which systematically excludes them. So, first of all, the hypocrisy of this, right, is basically telling Jill Stein to effectively step aside so that the duopoly can preserve its power. Uh, that was ridiculous, anti-democratic, and hypocritical. Secondly, why did they do it? They did it because they wanted Kamala Harris to win. Okay. Now, first of all, I actually interviewed Jill Stein after this disgraceful letter came out. And she pointed out that according to polls, a large proportion of her support was not coming from Democrats, people who would otherwise vote Democrat. It was coming from some Republicans, and a big chunk were coming from independents. So, and she said it's not clear at all that my votes are actually going to end up helping the Republicans. It could conceivably help the Democrats. It's not at all clear. But in any event, the stated motivation, and I think this is true, that the European Green Parties and Elizabeth May wanted to help Kamala Harris to win. Kamala Harris had the blood of Palestinian children up to her neck. She was completely and utterly complicit in this genocide. And when she was asked about whether she would change the Biden administration's policies towards Israel and Palestine, she gave no indication that she would change it in any material way and that she was fully supportive of the genocidal, monstrous policy. So what they were basically doing, these Green parties, was they were promoting a candidate who is guilty of genocide and who was helping to perpetrate at that moment a genocide, an ongoing genocide.
exactly.
And I should add that the Green Party of Germany is as complicit as anyone in this genocide.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So
She's a foreign minister.
genocidal lunatics of the German Green Party were trying to stop an anti-genocide candidate from running for political office in deference to a genocidal candidate. This is so disgusting. Where does one even begin to condemn it, Yuri? I mean, and the last thing that grossed me out about this, that I found so absurd, is that any person with half a brain can see that it was almost certainly the Biden administration that blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Okay, they destroyed, this was an environmental crime. It was an act of war against Germany. It has caused immense damage to the German economy, the cutting off of cheap Russian gas and so forth. So you have this spectacle of the German Green Party trying to stop a fellow Green in the United States from running so that somebody who was part of an administration that committed an act of war against Germany and did immense damage to the German economy, not to mention exposing the whole of Europe to the threat of nuclear conflagration. I mean, mind-boggling.
Yeah, and so disgusting is that the Green parties of of the countries I've mentioned, the Netherlands, Portugal, Germany, and so forth, they ostensibly run like the NZP does to try to buck the two-party to three-party system that's in the respective countries, and yet they're telling one of their own to not try to buck the two-party system there. Like, it's just flabbergasting. And then to me, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to tell Jill Stein to just shut up and accept the unjust two-party system in the U.S., then all of you guys should unfold as political parties and just merge
Yeah,
with the PSD, the
totally.
PPTA, and whatever party you think is the best party that's going to
Yeah.
advance climate green capitalism, basically.
Yeah, they've
It's
totally disgraced the
unbelievable.
Green Party. The Green Party move. I just did an interview on the Canada Files about this. I mean, I don't know that the Green Party movement will ever recover from the last several years. The support for the Ukraine war, which has resulted in the destruction of Ukraine, the support for genocide, adopting policies that actually did harm to the environment, relying upon liquefied natural gas from the United States is considerably more polluting than pipeline gas from Russia. They also increased their consumption when they cut themselves off from Russian gas. They increased their consumption of coal, which is much more polluting than pipeline gas. Plus the prolongation and the intensification of this war, all the pollution that caused, huge emissions coming out of that war zone, contaminants all over the Ukrainian environment. Plus the methane release caused by the Biden administration's destruction of Nord Stream. So even just from a purely environmental perspective, these people are traitors and frauds, 100%. And the icing on the cake in this sordid tale, Youri, is that even if every single vote that Jill Stein earned had gone to the Democrats, they still would have lost. That's how big the margin was between Trump and this pathetic candidate, Kamala Harris. I mean, think about how much you have to stink as a candidate to lose to Donald Trump. I mean, by a wide margin.
Yeah, and there is no doubt that just the Democrats not even wanting to sign up for a ceasefire, something as vague and meaningless as a ceasefire, they couldn't even do that. And watching Breakthrough News, I was watching Ronnie Akalik interviewing one of the Hadid sisters. I think Lana Hadid, and they were showing clips of the DNC, where there was a lot of Palestine justice folks protesting, and you literally had delegates of the DSC doing this and going la 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 la. And when they were at a student Democrat event and protesting, you had basically people dancing in a sexy way, showing off their ass, basically mooning the protesters.
Yeah.
I mean,
Wow.
it's just unbelievable. But then last question I have to ask is where do you think Palestine justice movement goes from here? Do you think that people just need to be continuing protesting as hell? We've had people been protesting Indigo, and we've had people be protesting politicians directly, like those who tanked Christia Friedland's launch. But do you think we need to escalate it more and actually protesting media outlets and whatnot? I'm curious your thoughts before we.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to, the polite protests are ineffectual. It's the civil disobedience, the disruptive protests, causing, business operations of complicit corporations to be interrupted, to lose money, publicly embarrassing and humiliating these genocidal lunatics who are in power in the West today. There should be nothing polite about our protests. They should be nonviolent, of course, but we need to cause them to be ashamed, to be humiliated. We need to disrupt their fake narratives, and we need to cause these complicit corporations to incur costs. And in that regard, it's absolutely essential that we escalate BDS. We really have to reinforce the message and help people to understand that these corporations have to be made to pay a price. Who are these corporations? How can we, cause them to incur a substantial financial penalty for their complicity in genocide? Those are the things that I think the Palestinian solidarity movement needs to focus upon. Polite protest is it's an absolutely useless, I'm sorry to say, tactic. Look at all the polite protests that have taken place over the last 15 months. That hasn't moved the dial. What will move the dial is when supporting genocide is more costly than opposing genocide.
All righty. Well, we are joined on this edition of 1+1 with Dimitri Lascaris on our All Things Israel edition, All Things Historic Palestine edition. Let me remind our audience, Dimitri is a Canadian lawyer, environmentalist, eco-socialist, anti-imperialist activist, all-round social justice warrior, media critic, and NGO critic. He was once a Real News network correspondent on Canadian topics and climate crisis, but now you can watch him on his own brilliant journalism outlet, Reason to Resist. And I'll make sure to link the YouTube channel and the Substack so that people can check that out. And he was the Green Party of Canada's leadership contestant who almost won second place consistently through the ranked choice voting. He's always one of my favorite human beings, the compassionate gentleman. Dimitri, all my best to you. Come back soon enough because there's so much things happening in Canada that we have to talk about. And I would love in the future we do an episode all about Greek history, and I'm curious your take on it. But until then, keep up with all the great work you do. And folks, please share 1+1's content and donate generously if you can. And until then, Dimitri, all my best.
Take care, Youri.